Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Eli Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome, Bassy.
Pleasure to be here.
I'm sitting here with Bassy Kutten. You flew in from New York for the opportunity to sit here, speak, share your story.
Yeah.
Okay. So I always like to go back to the original idea, to Saif Maisa Machshavat Chila, the end, the action that eventually comes from something originated in someone's mind as a thought.
Right.
Okay, so where did this, whose mind did the thought for this podcast originate in, and then we'll understand where it's headed.
So, mine, first and foremost, I think that for part of, we'll talk about it later, but at a certain point I felt very strongly like I need to speak publicly. And the vision in my head was like, of having arrived, was coming on this podcast.
Is that it?
So that was close to 2 years ago. And then the practical part of it is that my very close friend, Suri, heard me speak about it so many times that I want to speak publicly and I want to go on podcasts. And she actually was the one to reach out to you and make it happen. So I really appreciate her for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've been watching this podcast for a little bit?
Probably since its conception. Yeah. Yeah, and I've learned a lot. I think that it shapes the way you think when you listen to something for long enough. And it's helped me in countless ways, and really like in my healing when I was really, really struggling and I really didn't know how I'm going to make it through. And yeah, this was one of the anchors.
It's very touching. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so bring us into your story.
Okay, so where do we start? I guess we can start also by the...
Start where you grew up.
Okay,
Give us a little
I grew
character
up...
development.
Yeah.
And
So
then
there
I guess we can offer a trigger warning for those
right.
necessary for that. We're going to talk about sexual
abuse. A lot of sexual abuse. But I think that part is easier for me to talk about once I was an adult, because when I was a kid, I was so dissociated. I was so disconnected from what was happening that it's really hard for me to speak about it from a kid's point of view. I grew up in New Square. I don't know how much you know about New Square.
I don't know much.
It's a very closed, it's a shtetl, okay? And from the most extreme Hasidim. So I don't know how much of this is like just to pictures, like the girls wouldn't sing or swim or go on bikes. I lived there till I was 13.
Let me ask a question this way about it, not to
Okay.
interrupt for too long. In New Square, if there's a magazine or a periodical put out by the community, pictures of women in it? No picture of
Never.
women?
No.
Okay.
No. They even have signs on the sides of the streets where the men walk and the women walk. But I don't want to say this in a derogatory way or making fun. It just is. I just wanted people to have a picture of the place I grew up in. It's not to bash anyone.
Yeah, and I wasn't asking that question in that way. I was more highlighting how meaningful it is for you to come out here and speak and put your story publicly. Is that you grew up in a community where women didn't even put their picture, never mind share the fullness of their story.
Right.
And it's not to disrespect the choices of that community, and for those it works for, it's to highlight your trajectory, your path, where you came from and where you are now.
Absolutely. So when I was 13, my parents moved out. We moved, and some of us switched out schools also. So it's very close to Muncie. We moved to Muncie, and some of us started going to different. For high school, I went to a different school, also mainstream Hasidish. I grew up thinking I had the perfect childhood. There was a lot of stuff that only as an adult, only once things exploded and I had to deal with, did I realize that that wasn't okay. For a big part of my childhood, I was being sexually abused by family. So, yeah. I think it's easier for me to talk about that maybe when I get to the healing part, because when I talk about the pain, I want to stay regulated. Let's just say that.
Why do you want to stay regulated?
It's a good question. I like to be an adult. I enjoy my adulthood, and sometimes when I go back in time, I sort of become very young again, and I don't just not very comfortable, for sure not when it's public, you know. Yeah. I got married when I was 20. By the time I was 24, I had 3 children. And afterwards, things started to unravel.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So my kids were born very close together. And I had, a big part of the message I got as a child, for whatever reason, was in order for me to be okay, I had to make sure everybody else is okay. I am only worth existing if everybody else is okay. So I brought that into marriage and into adulthood, and that's how I lived my life, of like constantly needing to make sure everybody else is okay.
If we were using a word for that, would you use the word caretaker or use the word martyr?
I don't think any of those fit. It was my existence. It wasn't that I was caretaking. I guess I was caretaking, but it wasn't. I was trying to survive in a world that I felt that the only way I can do that is if I don't exist and I make sure everybody else is happy. So, I mean, there were signs of the unravel way before my 3rd baby was born, but somehow I think that Nesham's come down to this world to bring us messages, and apparently my 3rd child was the one to really make me face my stuff. Not about her, just about where we were in life. And I think she was 1 when I started seeing a therapist. For the first 2 years, I wasn't even connected to the part of, like, all the sexual abuse. And, I was just finding out that I'm allowed to live. I'm allowed to exist.
So before going into there, bring us into what made you go to a therapist. What was going on after that child was born, after your 3rd child was born, that made you seek out therapy?
I was not very functional. I think my anxiety was so high that it was really, really hard for me to do anything in life. But really, when I think about it, I'm not sure. I know I told my husband we're not gonna bring him too much into it because he likes to stay private, but I think that it's a lot his credit. He took the first step. And then I just followed, again, because I had the permission, because he was being happy. So, like, I can do it too, sort of.
He was investing in himself, so to speak.
Yeah. So I think he was in therapy 6 months before me. And I think I was a little jealous of him, like taking care of himself. So I followed and I started. It was not an easy start, like for many, but once I found the right person, and I think for the first 2 years, it was just about being allowed to have my own feelings and allowed to have my own taste in clothing and just having permission to be a person. That was the work we did for a very long time. at a certain point.
When you say to be a person, because it's a little bit of a broad term, do you mean to have wants, to have desires,
to have needs, to have opinions, to have taste, you know? And this is also like, I guess it's something I picked up in my childhood of like, if I would buy a dress and I would get criticism, I wouldn't wear the dress anymore because I wouldn't like it anymore, not because I didn't like it, but because I needed to fit a role.
Yes.
I think about 2 years into that process, things in our marriage got really rocky, mainly from my end. And I clearly remember the summer when it all started coming back to me. I was I was debating if we're gonna go into that much detail, but I think that it's important. Just so many people are struggling with these things. So I struggled. I still struggle, and much better and whatever, but I've struggled with sexual anorexia for a long time. But it was more than that at that point. I think that even just a touch was so triggering to me that it felt like I don't know, like all my insides are burning. And I had no idea why or what's going on. So that was a huge blow up in my marriage, because for the first time I was able to say this doesn't feel okay to me. And then in that same summer, I did a close to a week intensive. You know, you give in your phones, you stay there, you have no connection to the outside world, and you do real deep, heavy work. And also, the work was just that I have permission as a person to have my own feelings, regardless of what's going on, of how much other people are suffering and how other things, you know. That was in July. And still, like, we were very invested in our healing, and we were working with a couples therapist, and we were going, and even before couples therapy, I've had people ask me so many times if I was sexually abused, and the answer was always no. No, it wasn't me.
Why would people ask you if you were sexually abused?
Probably because I was exhibiting a lot of symptoms.
What kind of people were asking?
Therapists. I did group work, and
in those contexts.
In that context, yeah, in the healing world.
Yes.
And it was always a no, that never happened to me. I don't know. So.
And you said no because you didn't want to say, or because you thought you were being honest?
I was really disassociated from that part of myself, and I really believed that I was never sexually abused. And then around October time, it just like started coming back to me in like these weird ways. I would go to sleep and I wouldn't be fully asleep, but almost asleep, and I would have a flashback. And that's where I feel like, I mean, it was a lot of little explosions, and then there was a big explosion that lasted a few years. And that was when I started remembering. I do want to, there's a part of me that feels like when somebody doesn't remember their abuse, everybody like questions if like, yeah, I don't know, are they making it up? Did they see it in medicine? You know, like, are they sure? And I struggled with that a lot for many years. I read a few real good books around that. And one of the books that really helped me was Miss America by Day. I don't remember the author's name, but
what is it called?
Miss America by Day.
Miss America. Okay.
So she writes in her book how her father sexually abused her for many years, but she called it her day child and her night child. They were two separate beings that really didn't know of each other's. And it took her till she was in her 40s to actually sort of combined the two of really like realizing that that actually happened. And that was really validating for me, because I said to myself that, I mean, besides for what everyone else says, I was saying that to myself
Right.
all the time. Like, who said it's true? And, you know, I'm making it up, and I just want excuses for doing the things I'm doing. And
thank you for going here to this place, because I know it was my experience, and it was the experience of many. I was abused from the ages of roughly 8 to 10. And even those, they're approximates. It's based on physical symptoms I started experiencing. And I remember the camp I was in, and that camp was only after 4th grade. So I kind of knew my age based on that, and saying, okay, these were the time periods. But I always played with this idea of maybe it didn't happen, maybe it didn't happen, maybe it didn't happen. And I've heard it's almost uniform. Yeah. It's like an ingredient of abuse to doubt that the abuse happened.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when I sat with my abuser, and if you've heard me talk, you've probably heard me say this. So I had a meeting with him. It took me many years to get this meeting. And eventually when I did, I sat across from him, and I had a series of questions for him. And my first question was why he chose me. I said, why have all the other kids on the block? I don't know why I phrased the word in that way, but why have all the other kids on the block did you choose me to abuse? And he said to me, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, oh, you came all the way here to tell me that? We've worked this long. Tell me that. And he already quasi-admitted some things, but not the fullness of it. So in previous conversations, he admitted to some things. So he said, I really don't know what you're talking about. Maybe we had some interactions, but I don't know that any of them were sexual. Mm-hmm. And like at that moment, there was a part of me that was kind of wishing that I made it up. And I said to him, I'll tell you what. I said, I'm just going to start like spitting out memories. This came to me impromptu in the meeting. I'm just going to start spitting out memories. And if I'm wrong on anyone, just one, I'll stand up, walk out of here, say I made up the whole thing. Yeah. And I started going into great detail about the color of his bed sheets, different configurations of his bedroom at different times, the doorknob, exactly how it locked, what he stored in different rooms, different, whatever, all sorts of things, different toys he had in his room, different collectibles. It was just one after the next. And I probably spoke for what felt like 10 or 20 minutes, just mentioning memories. And the more I spoke, the more they came. And eventually, he started shaking. And he turned to the therapist who was coordinating the meeting. And he said he was having a hard time breathing. He started hyperventilating. Eventually, he turned to the therapist. He finally got the words out. And he said, am I a monster? Can I go back home to my kids? And in my case, I was abused by someone who did it as a teenager. But it was almost like it wasn't until that moment that I fully believed myself. Yeah. You know, like I had the memories. I had all of these things to support it. I knew it, but there was always this voice of doubt that crept in until he himself confirmed it for me. Yeah. So I'm very grateful that you're going to this place, because I think it's a place that most survivors of abuse have to go through. For whatever we do in our brain to pack the memories away to be able to navigate the world, it puts it into this hazy category, even when it starts coming back, or even if it's always there, of did it really happen? Am I making it up? Was it a dream? And has that kind of quality.
Yeah, I feel like memories of sexual abuse, at least from what I saw for myself and other people that my friends and people I've worked with, is it gets stored in our brain and our body differently than just a memory of. There's always this, like, it feels like a dream, and it's so vivid and so far, and this, not always, okay, from what I saw, because I'm sure there's going to be someone who says that's not my experience, but there is something about the trauma that gets stored in order for us to be able to handle it in a way of us really not, you know, I can in the same second not remember and remember vivid details, you know? Yeah.
When I mentioned that in a summer camp I started, like there were certain symptoms that came on that I knew they were very uncomfortable as a child, but I didn't understand what it meant until years later when I went to therapy. And the term that I was given was dissociating. But what I remember happening was repeatedly being in spaces where I was watching myself do things.
Yeah.
So I remember I loved baseball as a kid, and I remember like things like I would hit the ball and it not immediately register. Maybe someone on the outside wouldn't have seen it, not immediately register that the ball was hit and I hit it, and now I have to run.
Yeah.
And this kind of feeling sometimes, I have memories even today of like walking from my bunk in camp to the baseball field. And as I was walking, watching myself walk, there was a sense that I wasn't doing it, but I was outside of me observing it. And then I understood years later that this is when children, often when they're sexually abused, dissociate, and that it has that quality almost like a dreamlike state.
Right.
Where it's like, I'm walking to the field, but did I, or was I watching it? Like, how has that happened? Was I watching a dream? So that space of dissociation, I'm not sure. It would be interesting to speak to someone who's done enough brain scans or spoke to enough people to understand it, but it seems to be part and parcel of abuse.
Yeah.
Not maybe like, you don't want to say 100% of the time, but more often than not, there's some question of, did it really happen to me?
Yeah. And I find even today when I'm in so much of a better place, and if I do some real deep work, like I did a 2-night ayahuasca ceremony like a month ago. And everything was so vivid and so clear. So for the next few days, I was telling myself that it was all made up because I had to get back to some sort of coping mechanism of like, I can live with everything that came up. So I think that there's levels, and I think that part of the struggle was definitely starting to believe myself. But yeah, I lost my train of thought. But
okay, yeah. We'll pull back to where you were. You started speaking about this idea of doubting yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you wanted to give that a moment, which I think we did. Capture that exists as a phenomenon. But now, if you bring us back into as an adult, your husband started going to therapy. You started going to therapy. You're a couple years in. You're starting to get in touch with some of your feelings, emotions, opinions, ideas of you existing as a person.
Yeah.
Take us from there.
Yeah. So once the memories started coming, I felt like I really couldn't, as much as I was not functional before, I was still keeping up the bare minimum of, showing up for my children, doing the things I needed to do, that it should look functional, even though inside I was feeling like I was falling apart. But once the memories started coming, I was totally gone. I was so, I think it started with a depression, very, very deep depression. It was really hard for me to function. I would get out of bed in the morning, send my kids off to school, go back to bed till they came home, get them off the bus, go back to bed. I think there was a 2-year period of time that my kids had either takeout or cereal and milk for dinner every single night. Yeah, that was that was such a dark time, and also I was very stuck because I had such a hard time talking about what happened. Still do, but it's getting better. But at that point, I think there was like a 5-month gap from when I started remembering till I told anyone that I started remembering.
Oh.
So all that heaviness was just sitting within me, and I couldn't live.
I've heard someone say that, there's a lot in a name, there's a lot in a word.
Yeah.
So depression, right? To depress something, to push something down, right? That word depression, which is emotion we feel, may very well be connected to a lot of our energy is going towards, depressing something, pushing something down.
Yeah, that's definitely what happened for me. And so I think it started with the depression, and as I was working through it, it felt like I was walking through honey in my life all the time. Even though if you would see me in the street, I looked like a very normal, functional person. probably a lot more functional than I sometimes look now, because now I don't care anymore. Yeah.
When you say honey, do you mean?
It was so heavy. It's like,
Okay, interesting word to use. Maybe like tar would be a
tar.
Yeah, okay.
Right,
like I sound like the feeling of honey, but then there's so much of honey that's sweet. And,
Right.
Okay, so.
That's true. I didn't think about that. No, it's just the heaviness of trying to drag myself through the day. I would wait for the day to end, and then I would wait for the night to end, because the nights were horrible. I would go to sleep and have nightmares and wake up, and it was just a cycle, day after day after day, of like waiting for the day to end and waiting for the night to end. And then what? So
at any point in time during this, did you question your decision to embark on the healing process to begin with? Like, why did I even open that box?
Sure. I think that before I started healing, at least on the outside, it looked like I had a real good life. We were this perfect little family. Everybody loved us. We were not rocking anybody's boat. We were this perfect Nachas couple. And for my survival, I needed that. And the more I was going away from that, the less people I had around me, and the more intense the feelings got because of the things that were coming up. Of course, I doubted it at every step. But then I was like, okay, so now I'm here. Now what? You can't undo this. It happened, you know?
And from where you sit today, would you have, if that choice was given to you, would you have undone it?
No.
Okay, why not?
I'm so grateful where I am today. Because now I'm living, and I love my life, and my kids have a mother, and I love them in a way I couldn't have loved them if I wouldn't have done this. And just to be a person, to be a functional human being in society, to feel like I have worth in this world. Because even though I was so disconnected from this, I walked around my whole life feeling like I don't deserve to take up space in this world. I don't deserve to exist. So yeah, it was painful to get to a place to know that I exist. But it's so much of a better life.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think someone listening to this, depending where they are in their journey, but certainly if they haven't embarked on this in a serious way, would question, okay, so why do you do it? Look at all the risks.
Yeah.
You know, you're in bed depressed. You're officially going to therapy. Absolutely. It's supposed to be better.
Yeah. And definitely if you're not ready to deal with whatever, and for everybody something else, you know, some people go to addiction, some people become psychotic, some people have OCD, some people become really depressed, some people, I had for a while classic PTSD symptoms. I would jump at every noise. Wherever I would go, there would be a flashback waiting to happen. I was just, you know, and for everyone, something else is going to happen, but I think that there is a part. So picture a you, okay? If you're standing here and you want to get here, because obviously there's something not working in your life, you have to go down first. Because you can't get to the other side unless you face whatever is blocking you from getting there.
Right.
And no, it was hell on earth. But I'm really grateful for where I am today. So we had to go through that part. Right. And still going through, right? It's not a, you know, you're on top of the U and you stay there forever, right? There's going to be constant struggles but there's a difference between that struggle from those years and the struggles from now. It's definitely a difference.
Right. I think also, I mean, obviously everyone has to make their own choices, but a lot of these things are kind of waiting there at the surface to burst. And they can either be kind of faced on our terms, where we say, okay, I'm going to go now and move forward and deal with this issue and just continue going in that direction, or it meets us on its timetable.
Yeah.
Right? Because at some point in time, it has to bubble. And that's what happens to a lot of people. It comes to the surface in moments of stress.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a moment of financial stress or a child getting sick or something else happening. And all of a sudden, all of these things emerge because now the system is somewhat weakened. The defenses can't operate in the same way, and then
you're forced to deal with
it on its terms, not on your terms.
So it's interesting because someone really close to me asked me, why should I do this? You've been through hell the last few years. Why? I see you going through this. I should go and intentionally open my own wounds. So I said, look, don't. If you don't feel it necessary, don't. But when you'll see that the pain of staying the same is bigger than the pain of making change, you'll do it. And sometimes it's much easier to be proactive, though. Like if you're not in crisis, it might be easier to deal with stuff.
Right. That's what I was saying. I think that there's also a lot, emotional pain and physical pain are very similar. And I believe they are, like, one is teaching us about the other. But for whatever reason in our upbringing, and I'm sure New Square wasn't that much different than Crown Heights in this regard, because I don't even think it's New Square or Crown Heights. I think it's American culture, Western culture, is we have a very different relationship with physical and emotional pain. So as an example, if someone's elbow was hurting, they would take Advil for a couple of days before they said, this is normal. Yeah. Like, I'm going to a doctor. I'm not just going to keep anesthetizing. I'm not going to keep numbing this pain. There must be something else going on here. Maybe there's an infection. Maybe there's a broken bone. Yeah. Like, there's something I have to deal with. Let me go to a doctor and get it checked out. But with emotional pain, not only will we keep numbing it, some of the doctors we go to for help will also say, keep numbing it.
Right.
And some people are numbing it for years and years and years.
Right.
And then the other side of that, just to finish one point, is often with surgery you see this. So for example, I had a friend he was an athlete, tennis player, and not tennis player, but like he played tennis in his spare time, and he ran, and he exercised. And a doctor, his knee was bothering him. He went to the doctor. Actually, you need a knee replacement surgery or something, right? Something in his knee. And it was kind of interesting from one day to the next, because the moment he chooses to go into surgery, and eventually he made that decision to go in, then from that day forward, it's not better. Like, he was able to play tennis with mild pain. He was able to run with mild pain. And when he opted into the path of surgery, he was not able to walk for several months, right? So sometimes the healing process, in a physical sense, when we see that physically, and the guy says, oh, I'm recuperating, I just did a surgery. So we say, oh, of course. Right? He did a surgery. He was able to play tennis last week. He's not able to play tennis this week because he just had a knee replacement surgery. And we understand that now it's going to get better. But with emotional problems, we want it to be better. But like you said, it often gets much worse before it gets better. That's the nature of healing.
Yeah. And I think that the longer you numb it and the longer you push it off, the bigger the pain is going to be when you actually go in,
the infection has time to grow more and more.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. So bring us further into, because we're stopping at a few key points, which I think are important, but bring us further into your story. So as you begin to...
Yeah. So at a certain point, I went on medication just because I had such a hard time speaking about what happened to me. And the people that were guiding me were saying, you never try to do surgery without anesthesia. And it was the right decision for then. I was just thinking about it because we were talking about the numbing. But at a certain point, I also felt like it was really numbing me out. It wasn't helping me feel. Maybe it was helping me express a little bit more because I wasn't feeling. But it was really not. I think after 2 years, I stopped the medication. And I, till very recently, did not put the two together. But after I stopped the medication, I started having extreme flashbacks all the time. I would be in a store, and all of a sudden I was there. I remember one year, it was in March. It was probably the first decent weather in New York on a Sunday, and we took the kids to the park. And in the park, I had a flashback, and I just needed to leave. And it kept on happening again and again and again. And it became really, really hard to live. And I don't know if the suicidality happened before the flashbacks or together with, but at some point I also started, I'd never actually attempted or ever hurt myself, but there was a lot of thinking about it, a lot of like, I need to end this pain, can't handle it, there's no way I can live with this.
How long ago was this?
3 years, I think, about.
Got it.
Yeah, so there was a lot of that with the flashbacks, and then it was like, I can't live like this. What's the point of working through another flashback? So just to have another memory, and that kept on happening for a real long time. And I'm really blessed. I have an amazing therapist. I've been with him for probably 5 years now, 4 or 5 years. And one of the things he kept on telling me was, there's something deeper in you that cannot be hurt by this pain. Like, let's access that bigger part of yourself. And I couldn't do it. I kept on saying that there was no part of me ever that wasn't hurt. I was born wounded. Which later I actually saw it with psychedelics. How
that there was a
part of me that was wounded even before birth. Not physically, but emotionally.
Yes.
Spiritually, right. Like the abuse was almost the practical part of me needing to be born, needed to happen in order for the sexual abuse to happen, but it was there before I was born, almost. I don't know if that's making sense, but
it makes sense.
I really couldn't do it. I had nothing to anchor into. So it was a few years of hell, and I was doing everything right. I was doing twice a week therapy. I was doing group therapy. I was working hard. I was working so hard on myself and feeling like there is really no hope. I don't know how I'm ever going to get out of this.
Are you comfortable speaking to some of the flashbacks, some of the abuse? Because sometimes when the terms are used, and don't go here if you're not comfortable, I just found for my own story, I felt like people would misinterpret it if I didn't specify sometimes, like what I'm actually talking about.
So there are, I don't know if I can share about details of what happened to me, but I can explain what a flashback felt like for me. So it was, I went into a store randomly. I was going from one place to the other. I made a stop in a random store that I hadn't been in from when I was probably 7, I would say. I had the kids in the car. My husband and the kids were in the car. I ran into the store to get one thing. And just the feeling of like something really heavy happened here. And it wasn't like a right away thing that I knew what was going on for me in that particular case. I also met a family member, not one that abused me, a different family member in the store. And it just felt too scary to even breathe. And then for the rest of the day, I was just like, I wasn't myself. It was like I was walking in a dream. And then I put the two together, that at a certain point, I was promised a prize if I did certain things. And we went to that store afterwards. And I never got the prize, but that's... Or the other time, another thing that happened, that was more recent. It was last winter. I was going to sleep one Friday night. I had a ceiling fan in my room. And it made a noise. Sometimes like the strings just like make a weird noise. And all of a sudden I was a little girl again, and the fan changed colors, different things were happening. It was just, I don't really want to speak to what was going on, but it took, it's almost like a different entity went into my body, took over. And I was out of control. I couldn't stop it. It was just playing over and over and over again. I think for...
The memory was playing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
When you say it was almost like a different entity went into your body and took over.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it would be appropriate to remove the words "it was almost like"?
It was like, yeah.
No, it's like it wasn't like an entity moved into your body and took over.
Yeah. And maybe that entity was my younger self, you know? I was totally out of control. It was like I was experiencing it all over, experiencing it all over again, right? So whatever that entity was, maybe it was my younger self, I don't know. But I had no control over what was going on for me. I was almost going to say that again. It was almost like, I think there were a few years that I was living in a horror movie. And I lost the remote and I couldn't shut the TV off. It was just over and over and over again. And always different memories. Like it was a TV show and a series and but it was out of control. And I think that's when I really got suicidal. And I couldn't live with myself anymore.
Right. The reason why I said it, I'm not sure where you stand with it, is that as I sit here today, it's my belief that another entity does come in. That an entity actually does come in. There's someone showed me, you've heard of the book Shar HaGulim? I think it's by the Arizal, but I'm not. A Kabbalist wrote a book. It's the gates of Gegulim is reincarnation. And towards the end of it, there's a story of, I don't remember who it was, maybe the author is writing in first person, like himself, but a story of someone who was brought in to help an individual who was struggling, and then they communicate with the demon that was inside the person, and eventually get him to agree to leave the body. But somehow through whatever they used, God's names, incantations, or other stuff. Actually, no, I'm sorry. In the Shargum, they say that they were unable to do it, and they went to a certain, like a non-Jewish gentleman who was able to, who had these skills to talk to them, but without going into all the details of the story, which is less relevant. My point is that it's accepted within a major Jewish writer's book, right, that these concepts exist. And I think it's true. I think that when we're talking about, I don't think sexual abuse could be understood. The ramifications of sexual abuse could be understood if we don't have a spiritual view or perspective of the world. Right. And I'll say what I mean by that. I've met people whose lives were wrecked by sexual abuse who were not for that experience, were not for those experiences, sometimes one or two, right? But not for those experiences. It's unclear that they would have had these challenges. And I don't have a parallel with other kinds of abuse. So, for example, psychological abuse. I mean, we could have all had a teacher or someone else who was mean or unkind. But I don't think psychological abuse messes with someone unless it's sustained, continuous over time. Same with physical abuse, sustained, continuous over time. You rarely hear someone who says, like, my parents beat me one time and now, like, they're 30 years later, they're suffering. No, they sustained continuous bullying, continuous physical abuse, continuous emotional, psychological abuse, and then something snapped. And I think with sexual abuse, while that can certainly be the case, it sounds like in your story there were repeated events of sexual abuse. In my story as well, there were like memories of memories of memories. I mean, I knew I was being dragged to a place that I remember going and thinking I've been here before. It was like tens and tens of times. Yeah. But I also know of people who have one time something happened and like their life shifted. And my only way of understanding that is that something attached to their soul, almost like their spirit, that there's one way of looking at it is that there's only one kind of abuse. The only real kind of abuse is spiritual abuse. Yeah. That our spirit gets abused. And to go from physical or psychological or emotional abuse to get our spirit in a real way takes a sustained kind of abuse, because there's a gap that has to be crossed between our physical body and our spirit. But once we touch sexuality, like somehow it's like instantaneous sexuality, the spirit that was touched, it's an open area and it can go right in. And my understanding of that very often is, as I sit here today, is actually an entity going in. And the reason why I share that, the reason why I think it's important, at least from a perspective, none of these things have to be true or not true. Like as a perspective, the reason why I share that is because I think think it's important to see it as a thing sometimes. It's not a choice that someone is making. Right. It's not someone's opting in. Oftentimes people say to someone who's abused, like, get over it. Like, this is not, if we say, like, what are they getting over? Like, let's say at the moment that this adult sexually abused that child, what happened there was that they invited a demon to enter the body. Let's say, imagine, like, now a demon's in the body. What are they getting over? You want to slay the demon? You want to,
right? You have to expel the demon first before you can get over it.
Right. And when we can use a language sometimes that makes it, I don't know if physical is the right word, but makes it real. And so, like, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with something that's real for this person. There's something inside them that now has to be removed, expelled, exercised.
Yeah. I do want to say to the removed part, because we all have the fantasy of removing that part, right? That the demon entered or whatever that happened, to expel it from our bodies. And I'm a pro at that. Like, everything I do, even when I do my work, it's so that it should unhappen, sort of, to get rid of that, whatever. I used to fantasize about vomiting out my abusers so they don't live in my body anymore. And it's something that I recently, very recently, got a lot of clarity over, of like, there's no expelling it. It happened. Yeah, maybe eventually we'll be able to get rid of little parts at a time, but this happened, and there's nothing you can do to get rid of it. It is. It just is. It's like the vision I had at that point was that there was a knife in my heart that is there forever, and if I try to pull it out, I'm going to die. But that's because I was trying to pull it out because I didn't want to feel it. So I couldn't live, right? So hopefully there is going to be a part of my journey that I'm going to say, I expelled it from my body, but maybe not. Maybe it's about learning that this lives in my body and still showing up for myself.
Right. I would say just because the demon is expelled, right, doesn't mean that all the effects of it, the place it took up, and all those things are as if it never happened. I think there's a difference between the two. Someone comes into your house, breaks a bunch of shit, and then you kick him out of the house. The house doesn't go back to everything is restored. There's still a bunch of broken shit.
It's still broken.
Yeah.
But I think that I agree with you. And I think that the broken shit is much easier to take care of than the person that intruded.
Meaning?
My broken parts. Say I'm really good at pretending to taking care of myself. And I tend to myself and I take care of these broken parts and I have compassion. And maybe the symptoms get better. Look, I'm a functioning human being. But the whatever demon still lives in me, right? Hopefully one day it won't. But this is, I think also, and that's personally for me and my process, could be for other people it's different. I had to come to a place of accepting that these demons live in me.
Understood. Yeah, I respect that. There's a healing process I've been using recently called tapas acupressure technique. I don't know if you've I've spoken about it on the podcast. And in each session, it starts. That's how it starts. It starts by, it's okay, like, what are you dealing with? Let's group that all together. Let's everything we know and don't know about it. And I think people use different figures, but let's put that in a pot, so to speak. Okay, we're going to take that and put it in a pot. And then the first thing, they have a pose, like an acupressure pose you put into, and it says, and like the prompt is, like, all of this stuff, everything happened. It happened. And there's something, and every time that stuff, like every time like that part of the session happens, like, it happened. And I feel like something is draining from inside me. Like there's almost this subconscious or unconscious war to fight against that thing from, no, it didn't happen. It didn't. I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be. And it's like, it happened. And that's one stage. And then the second, and it's over. And it's like, okay, like that's another, like, okay, so whatever did happen, like it's not happening now. Okay, like it's over. Like relax. And both of those things, it's there's deep healing in those.
Yeah, I think that the depth of the grief, together with the relief of finally accepting whatever it is, it's so conflicting, but it's also so healing. Yeah.
Okay, so it was very important to you to speak specifically about incest.
Yeah.
That's your experience. You were abused by family members.
And
more than one family member.
More than one family member. And it's a real hard thing to talk about. I don't think people like to, I haven't met anyone that's just like, yeah, let's talk incest.
So before we go to talking about it, and I said like talking about it.
Right.
Right. Let's talk about it. Meaning, so it's not my experience. And I remember that I met a guy in addiction recovery who his father had died at this point that I had met him. He was maybe in his 60s when I met him. And he was on a long healing journey from drug addiction and sexual addiction. And he shared one day that his father raped him as a child. And there was something like, when I heard it, it was so visceral, and I believe he gave certain details. It was in a meeting, and it felt like whatever I had experienced wasn't that.
Yeah.
Right? There's sexual abuse, and there's that. There's call it incest, but there's a family member abuse. It's like it's a very different category of abuse.
Yeah, and whatever isn't in that category is just as valid, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not to minimize. We're not saying it to minimize anyone's pain or suffering or anything else, but it's to say what we're talking about when we're talking about incest. It's qualitatively a different experience. When I was talking about psychological abuse or physical abuse or emotional abuse, I hope no one heard me in any way of saying I'm minimizing those experiences. Those can wreck someone for life. The point I was trying to make was only that that sexual abuse seems to be able to like get someone one time.
Yeah.
And those others don't seem to be able to just like to get someone from one time. And maybe there's someone who does have an experience that is. I'm not minimizing any of those abuse experiences. Viktor Frankl says in his book Man Search for Meaning that pain is like a gas, and when it enters into us, it finds every crevice of the human body to go into. So he said that's why we don't compare suffering and we don't compare pain.
Right.
That being said, there's also it's helpful to name things and not quantify, but qualify. I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about that. So in the bucket of sexual abuse, what triggered for me when this gentleman was talking and saying he was raped by his father, I was saying, okay, like in my mind, I was like, sexual abuse. Until that moment, there was a sense of, I've experienced sexual abuse and I understand sexual abuse in some way, right? Like this is a felt experience. And then when I heard him speak, I was like, okay, that's not my experience. He's talking about a completely different category of suffering that's not my own, because like at the end of the day, who was he going home to, right? His abuser was his father, was who we look up to. It was just, it was
the one that lives in his house. So even when he isn't actually abusing him, there's always that threat. They live in the same house.
Right. So speak to that.
So I think that there is a lot of different parts, and I hope I'm going to not like it. You'll stop me if I go on a run-on sentence, because there's so much to say over here. And I think that the first thing is that the reason why it's not spoken about, and even like how deep and long and hard I had to think if I want to bring that in. I knew for a long time I want to speak publicly. The incest piece was something that I really struggled with if I want to ever make that public.
Right.
Because they're my family. I love my family. I would never want to hurt them. And I know that when this podcast comes out, and if there are going to be people in the family that might listen to it, they might get hurt. And I don't want to hurt them. But also, like, I once had a therapist in a group setting tell me something like, the amount of unconditional love you have towards certain people is unbelievable. Because I'm still trying to protect the people that, not all the people that, I'm also trying to protect the people that didn't hurt me, that are part of the family and are hurting also.
Right.
But by that means, I'm also protecting the abusers. Because it becomes so enmeshed with who you are and also the people you need for your survival. Kid is growing up in a house and there's someone. Let's talk adults now, because I think that teenagers is a little bit of a different category. But say there's an adult in the house that's sexually abusing the kid, and this kid relies on the parent or whatever that adult is for the care and
Yes.
to keep them safe and for their basic needs. So everything becomes warped into this crazy. And in the beginning, when I said that it's so much easier for me to talk about it as an adult, it's because as a child, you really don't have a grasp of what's going on. There's no way of knowing that. I mean, there is a way of knowing that's not normal, but this is your life. This is your reality. And even if it's not immediate family, say it's a grandparent or aunt and uncle, and there's constant interaction. We're such a family-oriented people.
Mm-hmm.
We need each other's for survival, that the people that are supposed to love you and care for you the most are the ones that are betraying you and hurting you in the deepest way possible. And that is such a hard thing to come to terms with.
And they're still caring for you also.
Right.
Right.
They are.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
Yeah. And not every interaction is sexual.
Right.
But every interaction has the potential to become sexual.
Or the memory of it.
Or the memory of it. Because some things, even now as I struggle with certain memories, that I don't even know if it was related to anything sexual, but it was related to the person and the place, so automatically it becomes.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's number one, is the part of how, okay, there's a different, connected to this, it was a really cute conversation I had with one of my children. They were very into DNA and how it works, and the genes, and the this and the that. So I was trying to explain it to her in her level, and I was telling her, look, you're part me and part your father. I'm half my mother and half my father. And Tati is half his mother and his father. So you get a little bit of all of that, right? And without skipping a beat, she says, so you have part of so-and-so in you too. And it was so deep, the realization of like, there is a part of it of like, we are connected. Our DNA is connected. So if they're, I don't know if I can even say bad or evil, but they're doing horrible things, does that make me a bad person too? It becomes this like, but I love them. They're my family, but they're hurting me. There's so much confusion in that. Yeah, as a child for sure, and even as an adult, when I was struggling so deeply, it was really hard for me to reach out to even family members that weren't toxic or abusive, because I automatically put them to a place to pick sides, you know?
Right.
And then it breaks up the whole family.
Right. And often, I don't know how it worked and how it shook out in your family, but often when a child makes that choice, not a child, an adult makes that choice to start speaking about what happened to them as a child, the family will rage against them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, for some reason, and I don't understand it, it's so much easier to side with the other person. I don't know. It's just, it's almost, I think there's a part of that they feel, okay, I'm projecting here, but I know for sure that for some family members, needing to side with the abusers was because of their guilt if they acknowledge what happened to me, they can't live with their guilt of allowing that to happen.
Right. Right. What does it say about them? So it becomes very personal.
Yeah.
I think there's also, because if you see it even with non-family members, right? Just two members of a community and one person wants to speak out. I think there's kind of like the recency of the attack, right? There are two things going on that are both unpleasant.
Yeah.
There's the fact that this person was abused, which they'll say it's unpleasant. Like we want to help this person, but that happened 20 years ago, which is interesting. It always happens 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It always happens 20 years ago because when the child says it as a child, no one believes him,
right,
him or her, and then when they say it as an adult, where they might be believed, it happened so long ago. Why are you bringing it up? So there's never a good moment.
Never a good time.
Never a good time to talk about it.
No.
We don't have time for this discussion right now.
Yeah.
So the because of the recency of it, saying, okay, the discomfort that's happening now is because of this person choosing to talk about it. And if they didn't, then that discomfort would go away. So oftentimes they get the attack. The reason why I extended that is because you see practically, even when it's non-family,
right,
that the amount of times, like the default, it's almost like the default, human nature is, it's a crazy thing, but human nature is to side with the abuser. Yeah. And we have to take ourselves out of it intentionally. And I would say even people who've experienced this, by the way, even people who've experienced this, there's almost like it feels like swimming upstream and saying, okay, like I know I have to push against my nature, which is just it feels so much easier to side with the abuser. It happened a while ago. It's not happening in this moment. Yeah. We'll put it to the side. Like, can you just be better?
And it keeps the peace.
Keeps the peace, exactly.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I didn't keep the peace. And it's not pretty. It's always like, do I choose to show up at my brother's wedding? Because I love him. He's my flesh and blood. I want to be at the wedding. But inevitably, I'm going to have interactions with the people that really hurt me. Or do I not come and everybody is going to be mad? And it's an impossible choice.
Right. There's no good choice there.
There's no good choice. Yeah. Yeah. I think I was thinking about it a lot. And I'm thinking about specific people that were abused and brought their abusers to justice. And they were not Jewish, the abusers. And they got the full support they needed.
Right, exactly.
The second you switch out the abuser for a Jew, it doesn't matter what kind of Jew, half the support is going to go away. And if it's somebody from your community, even more support goes away. And if it's someone from your family, there's nobody left.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. You know, there's this theory that the Jews have a responsibility in this world.
Yeah.
I've heard it said in different ways, but I think collectively, most of us Jews, especially those who are religious, but even many who are not, will adopt this mindset of tikkun olam, right? It's a role of the Jews to be a light unto the nations, to repair the world in some way, even though many who are using that term are not preaching godly ideals. But the concept of Jews having this role of moving the world forward in some way, I think is one that many Jews subscribe to. And one way to think about that is that if there's a problem on the outside that we're seeing in the world, that it started amongst the Jews first, like in some way, not always exactly in that way, but in some way, which is interesting because now there's a new administration in the U.S. and God willing, it'll be good for everyone, good for the country, and they're making a lot of changes, and God willing, everything goes well and proper. But in the prior administrations, and in general in a lot of Democrat-run cities, there's a lot of crime that happens. Right. And one of the first questions that's asked before what did they do is tell me about the people involved.
Yeah.
Were they black? Were they white? Were they Hispanic? Was the victim? Was the right? There are many examples of this. I heard Sam Harris. I don't know if you know. Yes, Sam Harris, who was talking about it regarding the Daniel Penny case. Daniel Penny was I think he was a former military person, Marine, who defended some people from a homeless person, and not homeless person, he may have been also homeless, but he was attacking people, I think, on the subway, and he ended up choking him out and killing him. And he said, what's amazing, he made this point, he said, what's amazing is that when you start telling people the story, they don't know what they think until you give them the races and identities and socioeconomic status of the players involved. And then based on that, they'll change their thinking.
Yeah.
If the guy who was defending was a black guy and the person he choked out was a white guy, it was this thing, if they had more money or less money, all of a sudden, all of these things play into, he says, we've lost our ability to think. And it's kind of similar. It's first time thinking about this, but when you're saying that if it was a non-Jewish person who was abusing a Jewish child, like, we'll think of it one way, one prescription. Another one is maybe we started this problem. Maybe we started this problem and it's showing up in the world in some way and saying, like, look at the craziness. We can't even have a judge give a ruling based on honesty. We have to have judges give rulings based on race and socioeconomic status. It's not like what is right, what is wrong, what is okay, what is not okay. We can't even form an opinion without these facts. And the same thing, unfortunately, is happening with abuse in the Jewish community, where opinions aren't formed based on facts, but based on all of these other side details.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more comfortable the way this problem works. Not for people like me, but for the, they don't need to take ownership if it becomes, say that the thought of the people that, when I came forward, there were certain people that felt extremely guilty that they didn't protect me, right? But that lasted a day. And then it's like, let's just forget about it and continue with life. So if they would deal with that guilt, and we would have a conversation, that would be hard and painful, but it would be really good for everyone involved. But there's a certain comfort in, like, I don't have to face myself and look myself in the mirror if I don't acknowledge that this is a problem, right? And I don't know if this is also, like, only from my experience. Unfortunately, most of the people I know, their abusers are very prominent members in the community, including myself. It would take so much more to side with a victim because of the abuser's status. So it's so much easier to just say, that one's chash of a person. Can't be. That one, they're rich. They give a lot of money for tzedakah. How could they do such things? Because forget about us as people needing to fight society. Anybody who sides with us needs to fight society with us. And that's very uncomfortable. And if you're not forced to do that.
Right. Okay, so I want to make sure I understood what you said. You said that most people who were abused by prominent people in the Jewish community.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Unfortunately, I think, I'm not saying all prominent members are like that, but I think part of the profile of an abuser is that they groom the whole community, the whole society, or within a family. They groom the family to just, it's part of, for me, it's just part of the profile, unfortunately, of when someone says, I can't believe so-and-so, such a whatever, name it, however prominent they are, like, it makes so much sense to me. And of course, they don't abuse every single person that they come across. They find
That's, by the way, that's why I'm laughing, but a common defense against people, common defense if information comes forward about an abuser, is I know someone who interacted with him and he didn't abuse. I know a kid who was tutored by him and that didn't happen. Yeah. I spoke to his other students and they weren't abused. As congratulations. Like, how does that change what one person went through?
I think that they pick their victims very carefully by knowing, the risks, seeing personality. I don't know what it is. Like you said before that you asked your abuser why he chose you. I don't know what it is about a person that makes someone choose them, but they, whether consciously or unconsciously, know how to pick those victims and put up a face of, like, we're, we're the best, we're the greatest, we're kind, we're loving, we're accepting, and then nobody believes the victim.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I've seen it. I've seen a number of circumstances where the Malcolm Gladwell has the writer Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah.
Number book,
Vaguely.
Outliers, Blink, I think it's called. Or he has an article where he wrote, I think it was about Jerry Sandusky. I think it was Jerry Sandusky was a football coach who abused a number of kids. And what he said is that it was definitely Malcolm Gladwell wrote it. It may not have been about Jerry Sandusky. It could have been a very different high profile person who abused a number of kids. And what he said was that it never started with abuse. That wasn't the way it was. It started with these interactions that you were the weirdo if you suggested it was sexual.
Right.
He passed him in the locker room and he slapped him on the back. And then it went to his butt. And the next time it was when he was naked in the locker room.
Yeah.
And then with each one, there was nothing said and nothing done.
Yeah.
And if at any point in time there was a question, he backed off that one.
Right.
So if either the person themselves felt comfortable standing up or someone else stood up in defense of any of these children, then those interactions were these meaningless encounters.
Right.
They were nothing. How are you going to prove someone's intent when they walked in the locker room and gave someone a hug that was a little bit longer and they'd happen to do it when just after they removed their shirt? Is it sexual? Is it not sexual? We're the crazy ones for even introducing the concept. And then slowly when those boundaries are pushed and not responded to and not reacted to, not by the child or by the parent, which again, if a child is not standing up for themselves, then it's a failing in some way on the parent to not be there. Then one day it eventually led.
Right. And then the person that it didn't lead to whatever full-blown abuse because they stood up for themselves.
Yeah, they could have one of the test subjects.
They can say, why? So he's a weirdo that hugs long. Who cares? He never did anything else to me. You can,
Yes.
So I think that's something that gets lost of, like, people think that if there's an abuser, they're abusing everybody in their surroundings. Not always happening. But I do think that in families, if there's sexual abuse within the family, if there's incest, everybody in the family gets affected, even if they weren't the one suffering the abuse.
What do you say more about that?
I think in general, if there's any, sexual abuse that happens to a child, everybody in their surroundings gets affected. But I think that when it's in the family, I'll give you a practical example. I once did a piece of work in psychodrama. I did for quite a few years a psychodrama group as a participant before I started leading one. And I once did a piece of work. We were playing out a scenario, and the facilitator told me to pick a scarf, and this is the energy in the room. Tell me what the energy in the room is. It's empty. Nobody is there. It's just the walls are speaking. What are the walls saying? And right away, the words out of my mouth was, there's a perverted sexual energy in here. So if there's that lingering in the home, there's no way that other people aren't being affected. They might not realize how they're being affected. They might not realize why they're struggling in certain ways. But if this is what's going on within the family, it's part of the culture. It becomes part of the whole, everything you're growing up.
And would you extend that point beyond immediate family? Would you extend that to community, to schools, to?
Yes. First of all, beyond immediate family, because I think that that's also, the people who abused me didn't live in my house. But there was a certain something of, like, there was a, it affects everybody in the surroundings, in the immediate, everybody gets affected. So if it's and then on a broader scale also, right? So if this is happening in the family, if there's a community where I think that in terms of becoming more holy and more sheltered, the breeding of the perverted sexual energy has much more space to grow. And yeah, it affects everyone. That there's no, I don't know, I don't think that little girls should feel like their bodies are in any way sexual, so they have to hide or whatever. I think that's also part of the I don't know if I should say this. This might get me in trouble. But it breeds a certain, us to believe that this is the purpose for our bodies, right? We need to hide it because otherwise the men won't control themselves or whatever.
So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying that say a focus on tznius at a very young age is a form of early sexualization.
Yeah. There's no reason a 6 or 7-year-old should need to know certain parts of halacha when there's nothing sexual about a 6-year-old, right? And we can keep to the gedarim and we can honor certain things, but we don't have to put it onto the children that their bodies are not allowed to be seen.
And you feel like that exists because there's a culture of perverted sexual energy, and that's a outgrowth of perverted sexual energy.
Yeah. I think in the name of making ourselves holy, we took that exact holiness and turned it into perversion.
Okay, interesting. When I started talking about sexual abuse 10, 12 years ago, now it's more complex, I think. I think there's space for it. But when I first began, there was so much criticism around like Lashon Hara. I'm like, wow, you're such a religious Jew. You're so worried about Lashon Hara. Like, you're so cute. So adorable. Like a little munchkin over here worried about Lashon Hara. Like, what about the other halachas?
Yeah.
Suddenly we put this top of the mountain, right? Lashon Hara. That's the thing. I remember Mayor Seawald once said, what did he say? He said, it's crazy. Like, he was sometimes very graphic when he spoke publicly for good reason. Some people needed that to wake up. He's like, it's crazy that it bothers you more that I will say that a grown man did this to a young child, and he was very specific about it, than the fact that a grown man did that to a young child.
Yeah.
Right. Like, think you're worried about Lashon Hara. Like, I just told you. Yeah. Like, I just told you about a child who was sexually abused by an adult, and you're talking about Lashon Hara. Like, where did you get off this thing? So there was a lot of Lashon Hara. There was a lot of Chil Hashem. That was the best one. Chil Hashem.
Yeah.
People have lost their mind about what it means to be Chil Hashem.
I think the biggest Chil Hashem is if we don't hold people accountable. That's really...
Yeah. First we have to talk about who we're responsible to with Chil Hashem. Right. This is a Torah right here on the In Search of More podcast that I'm comfortable sharing. When we were kids, if we went to a park or we went on a field trip or we went, just outside of the community, it was told us to behave because of Kid Hashem and not to misbehave because of Chil Hashem.
Right.
And it took me years to realize that those aren't the consequences of Chil and Kid Hashem. The consequences aren't when we go on a field trip, some person who passes by a few Orthodox Jews may think one thing or another.
Yeah.
The consequences of Chil Hashem are going to be the kid who's steeped in who's in your school, who's listening to you as the authority and representative of God. And if you miss, he thinks that's God.
Yeah.
This guy in the street has a lot of opportunities to interact with a lot of different people and to hear about God.
Yeah.
This kid in your class doesn't.
Right.
He sees you as the representative of God.
Yeah.
And the Chil Hashem and the Kiddush Hashem is not the gas station attendant 3 streets out of the community. It's the kid in the community.
It's your own people.
Yes. When we talk about Chil Hashem, the Chil Hashem, the desecration of God's name has been that in the name of God we said, your pain doesn't matter. That's the desecration of God's name.
Absolutely. And most of the time, the people who do these things, no, not most of the time, many times when this is said, Chil Hashem, whatever, the people that are being accused are the ones that are portraying the Judaism. And then what is that doing to the child that's being abused? If Judaism is tied to the person that hurt you in the deepest way, forget about the ways I think any sexual abuse makes people struggle with their Judaism, with their spirituality,
Of course,
with their,
yes.
right?
Belief in God for sure.
Yes. But if that person is still considered as a rabbi or a very prominent member or very erlich, or they do mitzvahs, what does that do to the person that's being hurt?
Right.
I know. It really messes with them. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. The message you're trying to deliver is an important one.
Very important.
Is that in a perverted sexual environment, everyone suffers. And
Yes.
the evidence you have that there's a perverted sexual environment is the fact that their kids were sexually abused. That's it.
Yes.
So you're saying like one of the outgrowths of this perverted sexual environment is a hyper focus on sneas at a very young age. It's early sexualization of children.
Yes.
That's what you're saying. That's your point. I'm not saying it's
That's
my point. That's your point.
That is my point.
And you're saying you may want to edit that out.
I'll have to think about it. But the other and to further that point, I've been thinking about it a lot. I live in a very Hasidic neighborhood. And when I walk in the street and I see these adorable young 13, 14-year-old boys that are walking in the street and I pass and they feel like they need to hold on to their pace or their tzitzis, what is that doing to that bacher that's growing up and thinking that if a woman passes, you are bound to get turned on? It's destroying them. In the name of holiness, you're destroying their sexuality, even if nobody ever touched them. If they're taught to always be so hyper-focused on that, that's what they're going to be. Or they'll run away from it, either or, you know.
Right. I was in a yeshiva where for Shabbos, we often would get invited by the community. Which was a very nice part of the yeshiva. So Friday night meals, Shabbos meals, it was always like that. And if there was a rule that if the family had a girl that was older than 3, then we couldn't go to their house, which obviously I understood it at the older ages, right? Whatever we were 17, 18. But there was something about that that's like, okay, like what thought are you trying to put into someone's mind? It felt like it originated. I don't know who came up with the idea, but it felt like it originated in a twisted mind. I just don't.
Yeah.
The idea to implement this rule felt like it originated in a twisted mind.
Yeah. Because if you make everything sexual, everything will be sexual. Unless someone becomes asexual, which is also sexual. Right? So it makes everything into this thought process of like, if I walk in the street and I see a woman and that I can't even just continue walking further. I have to close my eyes or hold on to my tzitzis, whatever that means, I don't know. Then every time there is a woman, it doesn't matter what kind of woman, then everything becomes,
Okay, interesting. No, I hear what you're saying. This is your point. It's not my point, but the point that I'm trying to make is that you're considering, and you may, and it may happen that it will be moving this. You're considering removing this.
Yeah.
Right, which is fascinating.
Yeah, because I feel very strongly about it, but I don't know if I have the courage to take the heat that comes with. Right? There's certain things that I like talking about incest. I know I'm going to get heat, but listen, somebody's got to do something about it. And
right.
Yeah.
You know, it was interesting. It's what did they say? There's a saying, it says, truth goes through 3 phases. First, it's ridiculed. Then it's violently opposed. and then it's accepted as self-evident.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, no one ever admits it was necessary to talk about. So someone has to go through that ridicule. Someone has to go through that violent opposition in order. Right now, you mentioned sexual abuse, and at least in Crown Heights community I came. Oh yeah, of course, it's an issue, and we have to address it, and all the schools are. I'm like, oh, slow down, slow down. We started talking 10 years ago. Everyone, like that documentary that we put out with a few friends, 7 Orthodox Survivors Speak Out. Before that was done, I didn't know of anyone's name and face that was put out there as an Orthodox survivor of abuse. That's changed. A few years ago, I was involved with Mic Drop. Remember that? Yeah. So the heat we got was an incredible amount of heat. Rabbanim were writing letters about us and outlawing events when they never called us and never checked with us. It was like a very interesting time, very, very interesting time in my life to go through these experiences and see all this reaction. And then shortly thereafter, I started seeing a lot of events where women were speaking and sharing their stories. And now at this point in time, I think that the concept of someone sharing their story as a way to impact someone, as a way to deliver a point, I think it's more accepted, but someone had to absorb the heat. The heat. Yeah. I don't think I absorbed most of the heat. I think Rashlo absorbed most of the heat. Over there, I was like, close to the heat, but the lightning rod was certainly in his hand that was attracting that. But it seemed like afterwards, I've seen a lot of people sharing stories. I've never heard the same criticism again. Yeah. I've never heard it afterwards. It was so interesting. Like now it's okay, share your stories. Like, no problem. So it could be there's if there is heat, and listen, I'm very detached from that world, right? So like I know it from speaking to people the podcast, but it's not, my children are not in the world. Right. I'm not there. I'm not living in that world intimately, so I don't know the consequences of it. Same point in time, I lived in it as a child, so I understand it. But it's interesting to me that we're at this place that you're comfortable talking, you're comfortable sharing, you're putting something out there, but then there's like this idea, right, which you're clearly very passionate about it. You said it with it's like, do I want to be the one to take the heat? I think a culture where, I'm not saying you're right in what you're saying. I'm not. Okay. But I'm not saying you're wrong either, right? What I'm saying is like you're sharing an idea, and like let's flesh it out. Let's ask the question. Right. Let's ask the question. What are we so afraid of? Let's ask the question. Right. Is the focus on tznius, right, at very young ages, helpful or unhelpful? Simple question. We just want to know, is it helpful? Helpful. So you threw out an idea. You, based on your experience, you believe it's not.
I believe it's not. I also believe
you strongly believe it's not.
I strongly believe it's not, but I also believe that you don't have to throw everything out because of it. I think there is a way of doing it in a more helpful way, right? Not obsessing over certain things, but also teaching kids how precious their bodies are. Instead of saying tznius, we need to cover up because maybe a man is going to see or whatever. Right. I think it's the intent behind it is also really important. So, yeah, maybe we question the intent and the way we deliver it more than the actual practical of what needs to be delivered.
Right. I saw something recently. Someone was defining a cult. Like, what do you mean? Like, what are some of the elements of a cult? And cults, I'm saying in the very negative connotation of cult, because cult is also from the word culture, and we want to create culture. But a cult, which, the classic, I think, story that many of us heard of the cult is the individual got everyone to commit suicide together. Yeah. Right. To drink a poison together. Right. So that people buy into a certain guru or leader. Right. So it was a news story, and they brought a cult expert on it, and he was talking like, what are some of the elements of a cult? Mm-hmm. And one of it is like, you're not allowed to speak out, right? Like, cannot speak. But it's also there's a way they're trying to shut down thinking. right? Like, it's not only like permission not to talk, it's like you can't even think those things. And we saw it very heavily with, I think at this point in time, it's safe. I think more and more people in America are realizing that whatever took over the Democratic Party was not, like, this was not a political movement. This was like an agenda that was way further than.
It was almost a religion.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't, not almost, it was a religion.
Yeah.
Right? Like literally religious ideas that were pushed and thrown through. And one of the elements of it, like where it got to, and the reason why I'm not attacking the party is because what's so interesting is that the Republican Party is led by former Democrats.
Right.
Right. So probably the Democrats had a lot of goodness before of what we're looking at today. If someone is saying the Republican side is good today, it's filled with former Democrats.
Right.
But something took over. And in that something that took over, especially over the last 5 or 10 years, it was forbidden not only to talk, it was forbidden to think. They were trying to get into our heads about the thoughts we think when we talk. And I just wanted to share that what you're saying, like, imagine you got pushback for this idea. You're just positing a theory. Yeah. Right? The Gemara, the Jewish way, is like every single theory under the sun gets to be explored. Right. How do we know the cow is going to go right? How do we know we're going to go this? How do we know we do this? We'll tease something apart in 27 different ways to arrive at a conclusion. That's the Gemara, right? That's the Jewish way. So like, let's tear this apart. Every question is acceptable. Yeah. But suddenly here you are saying, like, I'm not so sure, or you're saying it strongly, but even if you're saying it strongly, it's just an idea that we get to sit there and
we get to think about it.
We get to think about it.
We get to choose what we want our lives to look like. We don't all have to wear the same. Forget about the dress. We don't all have to do the same thing because that's what was taught. Maybe I want to question, and I'll come back and do the same thing, but I want to understand why I'm doing it. Right?
Yes. I did a podcast earlier today with a gentleman named Rav Afshi Weingarten, and he spoke about two things, which made an impression on me. One was, he said, I want to understand why I'm doing something. So he said, in the Hebrew, the word for like taste or flavor, right, is tam. It's also reason. Right? Reason for something. So he said, like, for something to, like, for us to enjoy it, that it has a taste and has a flavor, like, we understand the reason behind it also. So sometimes exploring that in some way gives the fullness and the richness of it. Otherwise, we're eating bland food. Yeah. That was one idea. And the other, he spoke a lot about the concept of bechira, right? That God said to Moshe, I'm going to put, in front of the Jewish people, we're going to put a path of life in front of you, a path of death in front of you, b'charta b'chaim, and choose life. Like, this idea of choosing is very important. So now you're highlighting that same point again of choosing. Yeah. Okay. Listen, I hope that you choose to put it in there, and if there is any backlash, it's not too strong. Directed at you. You're positing a theory based on your experience, and everyone is welcome to discuss it. You know what's interesting? I'll tell you what's so interesting. What's interesting is that I don't know there's anyone who can claim proudly that they got it right. Right. Because things aren't doing all right. True. So if things aren't doing all right, we get to ask questions.
Right. And we get to make mistakes and try again.
Right. They say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right. But if it's broke. Yeah. And it's clearly broke. And it's broke not by my measure of broke. I feel quite happy. I feel quite fulfilled in my life. It's not by my measure of broke. It's broke by the measure that they set out. Right? Meaning, so for the average Orthodox community, the goal is to keep the members Orthodox.
And it's not really working so well.
Many are not, right? Many are struggling a lot, in a lot of ways.
Right. And even the ones that look like, unfortunately, even the ones that look like they're following the path are not necessarily. They just might look like they are. Right.
Yeah, I mean, we all know a lot of people. I mean, you talk New Square or Crown Heights. I mean, Muncie, you've seen some of the inner workings of these communities. And for many of them, there are many children I know from when I was in Crown Heights in Yeshiva, like many left Jewish fold. Yeah. Right. I wasn't the only person who left Yeshiva not believing in God. There's many. So by their own standards, to say I took 1,000 kids through my educational system, or parents, I've raised a bunch of kids in my household with these ideals. and somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% are exiting. So I'm saying by those standards, it's broke. So okay, so let's tinker. And if this question of sneeze has to be explored, let's explore it.
Absolutely.
And I've seen it. Just listen. There's I lived a very secular life for many years, and there's a hypersexualization of children in the non-Jewish community as well, right? So it's not, there's sometimes the dress code or the dance or even like after school things that are offered to children sometimes have a lot of sexual connotations at a very, very young age. So it's not to say that there isn't some stuff.
But that's also the same culture that, it's not the same culture, but it's the culture that makes that happen. Whatever that culture is, for the Jewish community, it's in one way, and for the non-Jewish or secular community, it's in a different way. But it's the culture that needs some shifting around.
Yes, right. And that's a powerful point that you made, is that we're swimming in a soup. You know, I had a friend who went to a psychedelic, he went to a group for a psychedelic journey, and before it started, he was kicked out. And this is a guy I know. I met him in recovery from sex addiction, and they kicked him out for bringing sexual energy into the space. And he said, I didn't say a word. I didn't say a word. When I asked him, but I said, but were you? He said, yeah. Yeah, like in his mind he was. And what happened was he was in a room full of sensitive people. Right. And sensitive, but it's not so sensitive. We're all sensitive. It's people who are able to put language to their feelings and who are comfortable speaking to it. Yeah. And they said like, hey, you're bringing an unwanted sexual energy into space. Like, that's not what we're looking for. When I asked him afterwards, he was checking someone out in there. Like he was, he totally was in that space. So anyway, it's just, all right, that's what you're saying. Like they were sensitive to that and said, like, hey, we're all not going to benefit. You're not the only one who's going to pay the price of you being caught up in your head sexually. Yeah. We're all sitting in this soup now as a result of
that energy.
Yes. So we're going to ask you to...
Right. And to maybe to bring that back to the sexual abuse in children, sometimes most of the time, way before there was any sexual touch, there was that sexual energy, right? And like you said, in a psychedelic place where people are aware and they can feel the uncomfortability, they can understand what's going on for them. But for a child, they have no words for that. How do you explain a look that makes you feel a certain way and how that doesn't feel okay with you when you're a little kid?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've, I hope we've done some justice to this concept of incest. And now I want to talk about...
There's one more point that I want to say, which I think that incest survivors struggle with besides for when the abuse is happening and as they grow up and as they come out, all these things, there's another part of like your family. You're bound to look alike or sound alike, or there's something within you that reminds you of the person that hurt you. And that is so hard to deal with. And I don't think that's being named. Of like, look yourself in the mirror and you see the person that hurt you because they're family. Or I have it sometimes when I laugh. I had a few times I was with my kids and we were being silly and I laughed and I sounded like one of the people that hurt me. And I hated that about myself. I think that there's a deeper level of self-hatred that comes with now you're embodying the person. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Fascinating. You also spoke earlier about the challenge of talking about it. So I wanted to go into it before just talking about it. You also mentioned that the struggle that exists in talking about it. And I did want to give
the abuse.
Yeah, I did want to give voice to one other thing because it reminded me of an experience. I'll call it an experience that I had, or a conversation that I had. Some conversations feel like experiences.
Yeah.
So you said that when a teenager abuses a child, like that's different than a caretaker abusing a child or an adult or, someone who's viewed in a certain light. reminded me of a story where a young woman reached out to us at JCW for help with her abuse. And she said she was abused by her brother, and she was afraid that her brother was continuing to abuse possibly his kids or something else. And then after a couple of conversations, she went dark. And then when the case manager of her reached out to her, took a couple outreaches, I think, for eventually talk, that her parents, I think she was still living in her parents' home, and maybe they saw the phone number. I don't know exactly what happened, but they said they saw that she was talking to someone at JCW, and they had known that she was abused by her brother. And they said, if you continue to speak to JCW, I think it was, you're not welcome in the house anymore. Like she was living in their parents' house, or, you're not in this family. Something like very, very serious threat to her. And eventually she did, as she got older, she left her family's home and she went on her own path. But I observed to myself at the time that reaction from her father, that threat, was probably more damaging than the sexual abuse of the brother.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that having a teenager in the house abusing comes with a much bigger context, right? Because hopefully if the parents knew that something was happening and they still threatened to throw her out.
Right.
That whole culture was breeding for the abuse to
even transpire.
Yeah.
Well, there's aspects to everything, right? So I was abused by a teenager, and part of one of the hurdles that I had to get over was, in my mind, I'd always minimize it in some way.
Yeah.
Right. So I couldn't completely absorb the pain because I said, oh, he was just a teenager. He was just a teenager.
Yeah.
But, eventually I said, if a teenager stabs someone with a knife or shot someone with a rocket or something else, not what happens to them, like a rocket has still hit you.
Right.
Imagine you go to, the south of Israel and you tell them, oh, your house was exploded by a rocket. It was an 11-year-old who pressed the button.
Yeah.
Right. It shouldn't hurt so bad. It hurts the same. The rocket blew up the house,
Absolutely.
whatever damage it did.
Absolutely.
So there is that aspect. And there's an additional element, meaning the additional element one has to overcome is the minimization, the minimization to self of it. So I want to say that at the same point in time, the story that I gave, the reason why I thought that was the most damaging part was because she can still say, okay, like, this is my brother.
Yes.
I'm not relying on him for to run the house, to care for me, to do all of those things. But when her father turned on her, it's like, okay, now where does she go?
Right.
That was it. Like, that's why I felt it was the most damaging part of the of the story. That's why I called the conversation an experience, because it wasn't a conversation. You're changed after that conversation. It wasn't just words.
And on that note, I do want to mention that I don't know if it's like this all over, because I only know from myself and the people I've spoken to. But so many times when incest exists, most of the people in the family know that there's something going on, that there's something not right. When I disclosed to family members, nobody was shocked. Everybody knew that these people they're perverted people. And still, nothing was done about it for whatever that crazy happens. But so many times, it's almost not worth disclosing, because it's like they knew what's happening and they allowed it to continue, unfortunately. Yeah.
So let's talk about talking about it, the struggle of talking about it as well, because that's, in a lot of ways, that's what this conversation's about.
Yeah.
The struggle of talking about it.
Yeah.
You said even for 5 years you kept it.
No, for 5 months, from when I started remembering till I spoke to a therapist about it.
But you said for years you wouldn't talk to anyone else about it.
Right. It took me a long time to disclose to anybody in my family, for sure, or even like share with people that I knew that would support me. And there is a part of I know that people are different. Some people want to talk about every little gory detail. Maybe it's going to make them feel better. For me, I don't want to talk about it because it makes it real. So I struggled with that. If I don't talk about it, then maybe it didn't happen. Yeah. It's almost like you speak it into existence.
Right.
Because as long as it lives in your head and your body, but nobody else knows. So it's something that is happening within me. It's a form of denial, really.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, so where to from here? Where to from here? So we spoke a lot about the pain, the pain of abuse, the difficulty in the healing process, the all the risks that comes with, right? Opening that Pandora's box, the risk of not opening it. Right?
Yeah.
All of it, right?
That
Left with a bunch of bad
like
choices.
Jack in the Box if you don't.
You don't open it. It opens when it wants open.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman told me this. I didn't look it up, but apparently there are bulls and cows react very differently to a thunderstorm that's coming their way. I don't know if you've heard this. So cows, when they see the thunderstorm coming towards them, they run away from it.
Yeah.
So eventually, when the thunderstorm meets them and they're running away from it, so eventually it catches up.
Right.
And then because they're running away from the thunderstorm, let's say the thunderstorm is a mile wide, but they're running away from it. So they're in that mile for a mile and a half.
Yes. That feels like my life sometimes.
And then bulls, on the other hand, they see the thunderstorm coming, they run towards a thunderstorm. So even though it's the same mile-wide thunderstorm, because they're running through it and towards it, so yes, they meet it faster and they meet it sooner, but they get to the other side. Instead of their experience of it being a mile, they're running through it. So maybe they only experience a half a mile of pain. So I didn't check it up if this is like true with these animals or not, but the concept felt very, very...
it resonates deeply.
Yeah, it resonates. And I think it's... I think there are moments, like you said, right? There are moments where we've been both the bulls and the cows, right?
Yeah.
There are parts of our story we've ran towards the thunderstorm and parts that the thunderstorm came to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that maybe the work is to learn to just let the thunderstorm happen and deal with it when it happens, right? You don't have to run. I don't know. That's maybe a personal thing of like, if I don't have to run towards it, and it's gonna come and we'll survive. Still here, you know?
I think the way like as I sit here today, I think the move is to run towards it.
Yeah.
I think so.
That takes an awful lot of courage.
It does, but once it does, but it feels like courage. But eventually there's really no choice in it. When someone, like, we're reacting on instinct ultimately, but when we truly understand, okay, like, these are the weather patterns and this is my understanding, and I understand, like, the storm is faster than me, it's going to catch up eventually. Like, when all of those truths are understood, then eventually there's really only one choice, and it's to run towards and through it so that you experience it for less, unless you like thunderstorms.
No, I haven't met that person that likes their thunderstorms. Yeah.
No. But there is a lot of benefit in meeting these things when it's not a crisis. Like, very often these things get driven to the surface. And
I think that there was a point in my journey, so-called, that I had to learn that I'm not going to wait till I'm falling apart to take care of these things. We'll take care of it before it becomes a crisis.
Yes.
But the initial, it's very interesting. You familiar with the book? It's The Courage to Heal. I'm really bad with names, so I don't remember the author's name. But in that book, she writes that most survivors go through a period of time where they're really in crisis, when everything falls apart, when they're forced to deal with their stuff, and it feels unbearable. But like, eventually that passes, and then you have to deal with the daily life things that come up, and deal with things as they come up, not to ignore it again, so it becomes another crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We sweep it under the rug. We end up all tripping all over it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now bring us to where you are in your story now.
Current.
You're talking about it. You obviously, you said you're leading psychodrama workshops.
Yeah.
You feel like you have something to say on the topic. You feel like to some degree you've got to the other side of some part of the you some of the times.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the healing part of it, because we spoke a lot about the pain and I think it's very important to name the pain, but also that there is healing. And the first time I mentioned before that I felt like I had nothing to anchor into, because I was really struggling with it for a long time. And the first time I felt like there was something, it was actually, I went to, after you had Mayor Kay on the podcast the first time, he led a breath work.
You met him through that?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
And I had my first psychedelic experience without psychedelics.
Nice.
Prior to any.
Shout out to Mayor Kay.
Yes. And there was this feeling in the breath work of like, maybe there was no before, but there is a me. There's somebody that's continuing to fight. I haven't given up yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is something there. Whatever that courage within me to push to the next day is, that's the bigger part. So it was like a spark in my brain. And
that's kind of what your therapist was trying to get you to tap into.
Yeah, and it was really hard for me to get there because
in
I
that,
felt
in that breathwork experience, you
yes.
touched it.
Yes, and then we did a whole lot of trauma work, and the courage started to go away. At a certain point, my therapist recommended I go to Colorado. I don't know if you're familiar with the Center of Medicinal Mindfulness.
Mm.
It's a clinic that they do legal psychedelics with therapists.
Marijuana, right?
Did some marijuana. I did ketamine also with them.
Okay.
And it changed everything. It was almost like, I heard someone say this analogy, when there's a pot that there's like a whole burnt layer on the bottom and you scrub it and scrub it and scrub it and it doesn't come off. The psychedelics was like the water that washed away not all, a lot of the dirt. It was a 5-day intensive on psychedelics with a therapist in the room the whole time. It's very intense work. And on the last day, I remember walking in. First of all, going there, I remember thinking that if this doesn't work, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not trying anything anymore. I really didn't want to live anymore, but I wasn't going to kill myself because of my kids. But I was done. I was really done. And I walked into the last session, and it felt like, okay, very nice. We uncovered a lot of stuff, and it was cathartic. But now what? I don't have what to go, like I have no ground to walk on. And that session was so transformational. I had it was ketamine, so I don't know if you're familiar with what ketamine does, but
no, I've never done it.
For me, it was extremely visual with okay. So first I was dying over and over again. I would fall down a trash chute and crumble into little pieces, and people would walk on me because I was
this
just
was
part
your experience
of
you were having.
I was just part of the ground. I was really dead. And ketamine, it really depends how you do it, but for me, I was really numb. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak, but I started to cry because I was so.
And they refer to it as a dissociative.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
I didn't want to die anymore. I was just crying. I don't want to die anymore. And really that was like what was happening in my real life. And then God showed up, and it was the most beautiful experience. And I had this conversation with God, and he said, I'm going to continue dying till I take care of my younger self, to stop ignoring her, stop denying her pain, and show up for her. And it wasn't enough for me. It really wasn't enough. I was like, I can't do that. And God showed me how I was a part of him. We weren't separate. It was one big, beautiful thing that was me and God and all the souls in the world, but it was me. And that was like, okay, there is something bigger than the pain. Hey, that soul, nobody ever was able to hurt that soul. And if I connect to that soul, I can function. I can
That's all
breathe.
your soul.
My soul.
Right,
Yeah.
the part of your soul.
Yeah. So that was a life-changing experience for me. Even though like I've done so many things before that were like little sparks, but that morning when I went into the room was the last time I felt suicidal.
Wow.
So yeah. And I don't think that there is a point in life in anybody's life where you can say you're healed. I really would wish to meet that person because I want to do what they did. I really want to, be all healed. But there's a difference between, constantly needing to work, wanting to work on yourself and needing to work on yourself because you're dying. And I feel like that shifted.
Yeah, I think there's also, there is a change from, there is like a, like a better word, like a victim consciousness, right? Where we get into this very self-referential perspective of the world, where everything, like it starts with us and ends with us, and it's just this little box that we're seeing. And there's an element of it that's true, right? That I suffered, I was in pain, they hurt me, all of that is true. And then there's a shift that gets exposed for the first time, which in very much the same way you said that once you saw aspects of your abuse, you couldn't unsee it.
Yeah.
There's a spiritual reality that some of us have the opportunity to get inducted into. Like we're like dragged in, not by our own choice. It just kind of happens, right? It sounds like this psychedelic experience where, yes, we can suffer, and yes, we can suffer greatly after that, but we can't unsee that moment.
Right.
We can't fully unsee that moment or unlive that experience that, hey, we are a spiritual being. Like there's a spiritual, I had a similar psychedelic experience where I was, I've spoken about it here before, maybe you heard me say it, but it was the word I had for it in the experience was a life force energy. Maybe we could use the word soul for now, but I was a soul. I was pre-birth. I was like just, and I was excitedly speaking to other souls about like, let's go do this. And you'll be my mother, you'll be my father, you'll be my first heartbreak, you'll be the person who abused me, you'll be the teacher who was not nice. Like all of that, like all of these elements of it. And there was such a lightness and joy and fun to that whole interaction. I've never been the same since that experience. It was a sense that like everything I'm experiencing in the past, now, and in the future, I've chosen. And all of it was for something larger. There's a destination that it's moving towards. And yes, of course, we can get caught in the moment. We get caught in fear, caught in anxiety. But there is something qualitatively different to who we are before and after those kind of experiences. And maybe it's why lately there have been a fair amount of conversations about psychedelics on the podcast. And I felt like I was moving away from it. I was talking about a lot of other concepts, but lately there's been a lot. Today I released a podcast with Efraim Palvanov, Jewish perspective on psychedelics. Soon we'll release a podcast with Nir Manusi by the time this one comes out, where he spoke very strongly against psychedelics. And we'll have, like, for whatever reason, this theme is coming up again on the podcast. And I think it's one of the reasons that it speaks to me, and that I think that for those suffering and struggling and hearing your story, it only reinforces experience that it's like, how much suffering do we want someone to go through before we say, like, here is something that can invite you into a larger perspective of you, of your world, and feel like a soul. And it's so beautiful that you had that, like an opportunity to like speak with God, right? To feel like a child of God. Like what a gift for someone to be able to have that experience. And there's not, you can read 1,000 books on the subject and it won't touch it.
Right. And you could be doing good work in therapy for years not bad therapy, real good work, and still not get there.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know who it was. I think it was a Levi Yitzhak Berdichev who once, like, he cried out to God and he said, like, God, you put yourself in the books, and like the Yetzer Hara is like in the physical things. Like, what do you want from your people? Like, what do you want from your people? The fact that anyone chooses out of the books. And that's what I feel like in some ways, like some of us like had enough. Like, how much pain do you want us to experience? How much anxiety, how much depression, how much abuse? And here the opportunity to be invited. It's not easy. It's not without its consequences and its challenges and its difficulties. The healing process isn't over. But the fact that this exists for so many, I think it, like, hearing your story, it only reinforces it. Like,
absolutely.
You know, and a lot of people will say, like, oh, you know, you should try real healing before you do psychedelics. And you know how many people I know who did? I was in addiction recovery I was in therapy for 5 years, addiction recovery for 8 years.
Wow.
Before I had any psychedelics. Yeah. And my mind was blown by this stuff, blown.
Yeah, yeah. I do feel, though, that if I would have done psychedelics any earlier, it wouldn't have been good for me.
Say more.
I think it needs to be in the right time, and a combination of real desperation and also knowing that I can hold myself with whatever is going to come up. For a long time, like whenever there was a conversation of psychedelics, I was always really scared. One of the biggest fears was like, what if I learned that all my memories are not true? That was like that didn't happen.
Yes.
But I think that having the foundation of knowing that I can overcome hard things, and it doesn't matter what's going to come up within the psychedelics, I'm going to still live afterwards. I'll be okay. I think that was a very important thing for me personally to have before I did anything. And for a long time, I said, I'm never doing psychedelics. I'm not doing it. Everybody, you know, not everybody. I've heard from you so many times about it, and other people had suggested, and I wasn't going to do it. But I think that at the right time, with enough desperation and enough courage to know that whatever comes from this is going to be okay, I'm really grateful that I went there.
Yeah, and I'm not offering a blanket recommendation to anyone. Someone asked me recently, said, would you advise me to do psychedelics? I said, no, I wouldn't advise anyone to do psychedelics. I said, I'll tell you why. I said, there's two things. I said, number one, you have to have a really good intention for why you're doing that. Like, what is your intention? Why are you there? I said, the reason is because if I say, for example, like, I want to no longer live with anxiety, or I want to no longer live numb, or I am determined to save my marriage or be a better parent, then in that moment of hell that psychedelics may very well introduce me to.
Yeah.
If I have my intention, then it's justified in some way.
Yeah.
I say, I'm happy to be here if I believe that my goal could be achieved on the other side. Okay, you want to put me through hell for a period of time, but I'm going to be a better parent on the other side. I'm going to get rid of this anxiety, whatever my intention is. So it's A, have a very solid intention, and B, that it should be your decision.
Yes.
Because if it's someone else's decision, then when you're in that moment of hell, you say, that guy, what a jackass.
Because you say that to yourself. I mean, I say that to
so at least I
have
like,
said that to myself.
Right, so if someone chose it for themselves and said, like, well, this is crazy that I would subject myself to this thing. Good, it's much better than direct it towards someone else. So I don't recommend it to anyone. Right, the conversation is more, it's like the topic. Right, when I was talking to Nir Manussi on the question, and he had a very strong opinion against it. I kept trying to find common ground with him. So like, maybe we're saying the same thing. Like, obviously you believe if someone was like, I don't know if he heard your story, and especially the way you said it, you went to a clinic which was legal and all of those things, that he would say, no, you shouldn't. Right? Okay, someone's suicidal, someone has children, so they need to, okay, so you fit in the category. Right? But I think that where we more talking about the concept of it and the fact that there's a psychedelic revolution that's happening within the Jewish community, is it generally good with some negative things, right, and some risks and some concerns, or is it generally bad with some positive stories here and there that are emerging? And I sit strongly on the side for now. You know, I'm always open to be proven wrong. I sit strongly on the side now that from what I can see, this has been a very, very positive addition.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. And a lot of what I do today wouldn't have happened if not for psychedelics, especially that first experience. I think a first psychedelic experience has a special, it has a different place in your brain and your heart than the follow-ups.
For sure, yeah.
But that I wouldn't be speaking publicly if not for that. Part of meeting God and having that whole conversation was that I'm gonna speak publicly.
Why? Why is this so important? Why is this moment so crucial for you?
Why that was part of the message? Because it was almost like, I keep on saying almost like, and since you pointed it out, I'm thinking it in my head. But it was, for a while, there were things that I was seeing people say, B'Shem survivors, that really bothered me. And then there were things that I felt that people don't speak about. There's a lot of talk about addiction, but like, people don't talk about wanting to hurt themselves that much. And I felt like, or at least I haven't found those people. And I felt like I want to be that voice. I want to name this pain. Like people say, yeah, sexual abuse, whatever. Okay, so you're an addict, so you deal with it. No, there is so much pain there that needs to be named in a way of like, I'm not a victim. I don't need anybody to hold my stuff, but let's acknowledge that this pain exists. And this, I don't have solutions, and I'm not here to offer solutions, but let's name things. I'm very into that. I spoke by Shabbaton, and I felt like some of the speakers were afraid to name things, like they were dancing around the words of like sexual abuse. And it's so important to just name it for what it is. And if I have, and which is really interesting, and I think that for a lot of people it's that way, that my gift of being articulate with, when I become in that traumatized place, or my younger self, or my, the night child kind of place, I have no words. So when I do have words, I want to say them.
What's your full name?
Bassy.
Bassy.
Yeah. Okay. And which also, like, recently, also through psychedelic
there's no second name?
No.
Okay, Bassy.
Which I also really connected to after a recent psychedelic experience of like, I'm the daughter of God. I'm good.
That experience.
I'm good. I'm his daughter. What else do I need? I don't need to be anyone else's anything to be okay. Hopefully, I believe deeply that he will take care of me the way a father takes care of his daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the original Bassy didn't have a very good family of origin. He had to find God despite it. But it says, I heard that the Baal Shem Tov was an orphan, right? Both sides.
Right.
And I heard said that it's like, that's not an irrelevant part of his story. The fact that he couldn't find a father in physical form, and he couldn't find a mother in a physical form, forced him to seek one out.
Yeah.
And he found the best one, and then he introduced hundreds of thousands of people or more to the ultimate father and the ultimate mother. And so I think also that it forced you in some way to,
absolutely,
to find that God. Yeah, and even the experience you spoke about, right? A conversation with God.
It was not a pretty conversation. It's not like, okay, God, we're going to have like a... It was not respectful. It was not pretty, but it was so deep and meaningful. And so much came out of it. So much. The speaking, but not just the speaking. I think it was 2 weeks after I came home from Colorado, my friend Suri approached me if I want to start running a group for incest survivors with her. And I was so taken aback. I didn't know where that was coming from, but I was like, yeah, I'm in.
So you do that today? You run a group?
Yeah. We run a group for incest survivors, adult women, incest survivors.
In person, online?
In person.
Where?
In Muncie.
Muncie.
And God willing, next week we're running our first intensive.
Beautiful.
For incest survivors.
How long for?
Being 12-hour.
A 1 day.
A 1 day intensive. Yeah. And this all came out of just, godliness. That happened. And I also, it's very interesting because when I was a little kid, my dream was to become a therapist for a very long time. And then I started to work on myself, and I became I saw that I'm my own person and I don't have to take care of anybody's problems to be okay. And I decided I'm never going into the healing world. That's not for me. I've done it all my life. Forget it. I'm done. And I became a makeup artist. But after that Colorado experience, I came home and I wrestled with this. There's no way in hell I went through what I went through just to be a makeup artist. I have to do something with it. If I am not my pain, if I'm bigger than my pain, then who am I? What do I want to be? Really. And it's been an exploration. It's been like a lot of, for a while I contemplated going back to school, and then I decided that maybe eventually, not right now. And that there were a few things that I contemplated doing, and I landed on the idea of, it's not a very known certification because it sounds weird. It's called a peer support specialist. Basically, if somebody has lived experience, you can be a voice of hope for somebody that's still struggling. And they train you how not to get your stuff involved and really show up for the person, not for yourself, all those things. And I'm really comfortable right now to be just a person that's journeying along with you. Of I don't have the answers, I don't have the tools, and I'm not going to fix it, but I know what it feels like to feel like that and to really support people through that. So that's what I do now.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank you so much for coming out here, giving voice to these important topics, your own experience. I hope you're comfortable releasing all of it, but any part you want to remove is fine as well. I think it's part of the story.
Yeah.
It's part of the story too. The parts that we need to edit. And but hope your story reaches many people. It touched me today, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I think that for me, this is so much more than just a podcast. From so many things that I think I wouldn't be who I am today with the insights I have if I wouldn't have listened to your podcast in so many different ways. So it's a little bit I don't know, celebrity status for me of I get to sit here and the thing that has helped me so many times. So I really, really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Oh, it's a labor of love, and sometimes I wonder why I do it. I recorded 2 today. My wife just had a child, and in order to keep these going out every single week, it takes a significant effort, not only on myself, right, the time, the cost, and everything, but including on my family. But I've found it's important